John F. Kennedy is one of those rare public figures whose image never really faded. Even people born long after his death know the look, the thick hair, the easy smile, the sharp suits, the young family, the glamorous White House. But the picture most people carry is often made up of fragments. Some know the president, some know the assassination, some know the conspiracy theories. Fewer know how much of his story was really a family story, shaped by ambition, illness, pressure, and repeated tragedy. Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. Here, we learn new ideas and improve our English at the same time through stories. You practice English without feeling like you're studying. So, let us start. To understand John F. Kennedy, you really have to start with the Kennedys themselves. Long before they became what people later called American royalty, the family story was one of hard climbing. The early generations came from Irish immigrant roots, and in the United States of the 19th century, being Irish and Catholic could still carry real prejudice, especially among elites. That mattered. The Kennedy rise was not just about money. It was about proving that a family once looked down on could force its way into the top ranks of American life. The key figure in that climb was Joseph P. Kennedy. He grew up in the benefits created by the earlier family generation, but he wanted much more than comfort. He wanted power, status, and recognition on the biggest stage possible. He attended Harvard, moved through high society, and became determined to make himself impossible to ignore. Along the way, he built enormous wealth, sometimes through sharp tactics that would not exactly look noble in hindsight. He was aggressive in business, relentless in self-promotion, and always thinking ahead. He married Rose Fitzgerald, the daughter of Boston's mayor, linking two powerful Irish Catholic families. Together they had 9 children, and Joseph did not think of them as simply a family. In many ways, he thought of them as a dynasty in the making. The eldest son, Joseph Kennedy Jr., was expected to become the first president in the family. Then came the second son. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was born on the 29th of May, 1917, and almost from the beginning, he was physically fragile. The contrast between the family's glittering image and Jack Kennedy's actual childhood is striking. He was sick constantly. As a child, he suffered through one serious illness after another, and doctors often worried that he might not survive into adulthood. He spent so much time dealing with pain, fever, weakness, and medical treatment that it would have been understandable if he became bitter or withdrawn. Instead, the people around him remembered something else. He stayed funny. Again and again, those who knew him described a boy who smiled easily, joked often, and did not like to complain. That quality became central to his character. Kennedy learned young how to hide discomfort, how to charm people even when he was hurting, and how to make light of trouble. What looked like ease later in life was not always ease at all. It was often control. The Kennedy children were raised with high expectations and careful grooming. They moved in wealthy circles, met powerful people, and were taught to carry themselves with polish. But even inside that polished world, family comparisons were hard to escape. Jack's older brother, Joe Jr., seemed built for the role their father imagined. He was handsome, athletic, confident, and academically strong. He looked like the natural heir. Jack was different. He was bright, but less disciplined. He was charming, but more mischievous. At school, he did not shine in every subject, though he showed strong interest in English and history. He also had a rebellious streak and loved pranks. When other students mocked him for being Irish, he responded in a very Kennedy way. He turned the insult around and made it part of his own identity. Instead of shrinking, he made himself harder to dismiss. That mix of fragility and boldness became one of the most unusual things about him. John F. Kennedy grew up sick, overshadowed, and never fully certain of how long life would give him. Maybe that is part of why, from such a young age, he seemed determined to enjoy it anyway. At school, Jack Kennedy was never going to be the polished golden boy his father imagined. That role already belonged to his older brother, Joe Jr., who seemed to do everything naturally well. Jack, by comparison, was thinner, sicker, and much more unpredictable. But he had something that mattered just as much in its own way. People liked being around him. He had charm early. At Choate, the private school he attended in Connecticut, Jack was known less for perfect grades and more for personality. He did well in the subjects that genuinely interested him, especially English and history, but in plenty of others he drifted. Rules did not excite him. Mischief did. He became known for pranks, jokes, and a kind of restless energy that made him hard to ignore. When classmates mocked him with Irish slurs, he did not fold under it. He embraced the insult, turned it into a badge of identity, and made himself look confident rather than wounded. That was another pattern that would stay with him for life. He knew how to turn a weakness into style. Still, his recklessness had consequences. During his school years, a football injury badly hurt his back, and that damage never truly left him. He underwent treatment, spent long stretches in pain, and would deal with physical suffering for the rest of his life. It is hard to overstate how much of Kennedy's adulthood was lived through pain that the public barely understood. Yet once again, he learned to keep moving through it with humor and outward calm. After high school, Jack went to Harvard. There, his life started taking on more of the shape his father wanted. He was still social, still charming, and still very attractive to women, but he also began to take politics and international affairs more seriously. Joseph Kennedy Sr. had enormous ambitions for the family, and he pushed both Joe Jr. and Jack toward public life. The brothers spent time around diplomacy and political talk, especially while their father served as ambassador to Great Britain. By then, Europe was sliding toward war. Jack followed it closely, and unlike the image some people have of him as just a rich young man coasting on family advantages, he was genuinely engaged by world events. His senior thesis at Harvard became a book, Why England Slept, which examined Britain's lack of readiness for war. The book was successful and gave him an early reputation as someone thoughtful about foreign policy. It also showed that he could write clearly and attract attention for ideas, not just for his name. Then the war came for real. After the United States entered World War II, both Jack and Joe Jr. wanted to serve. Jack's health should have kept him out. His back problems alone were serious enough to disqualify him. But this was the Kennedy family, and Joseph Sr. was not a man who accepted closed doors easily. With help from family influence, Jack got into the Navy. He was assigned to command a patrol torpedo boat in the Pacific PT 109. This would become the central wartime episode of his life, and unlike so many political legends, the basic courage at its center was real. In 1943, PT 109 was struck by a Japanese destroyer and split apart. The situation was chaos, darkness, fire, and open water. Kennedy could easily have focused only on survival. Instead, he gathered the surviving men and helped lead them to safety. One of the crew members, badly burned and barely able to move, had to be towed through the water. Kennedy took hold of the man's life jacket strap in his teeth and swam, pulling him along while guiding the others toward land. It was exhausting, brutal work, made even more impressive by Kennedy's own chronic health problems. The surviving crew eventually reached a small island and were later rescued. Back home, Jack was celebrated as a war hero. That changed everything. Up to that point, the family's future had still centered on Joe Jr., but war has a cruel way of rewriting plans. Soon after Jack's heroic return, Joe Jr. was killed during a dangerous mission in Europe. His death devastated the family and shifted the weight of expectation overnight. The son meant for the presidency was gone. Now all of that pressure, all of that ambition, all of that family planning turned toward Jack Kennedy. And whether he wanted it or not, his life was no longer going to belong fully to him. Joe Jr.'s death changed the direction of John Kennedy's life. Until then, the family's political dream had been aimed at the older brother. Joe Jr. was the one their father had imagined in the White House. Jack had always seemed more like the lively, unpredictable second son, intelligent, charming, but not necessarily built for the full weight of political destiny. After Joe's death, that changed almost overnight. Joseph Kennedy Sr. now turned all of his hopes toward Jack. And Jack, whether from duty, pressure, or growing ambition of his own, stepped into the role. With his father's money, influence, and relentless planning behind him, Kennedy entered politics quickly. He did not rise alone, and that is an important part of his story. The Kennedy machine was real. Family members campaigned hard for him, connections were used, and his image was carefully shaped. But it would be unfair to pretend that he succeeded only because of family advantage. He also had genuine political gifts. He was quick, likable, calm under pressure, and unusually strong in person. Voters responded to him. He moved first into the House of Representatives, and then into the Senate. During those years, his public profile kept growing. In 1953, he married Jacqueline Bouvier. That marriage helped create one of the most famous political partnerships in American history. Jackie was stylish, intelligent, multilingual, and perfectly at ease in elite social settings. She gave the Kennedy image an extra polish that mattered enormously in the age of television and magazines. But behind the glamour, she was more than decoration. She was thoughtful, loyal, and often deeply helpful to him, especially in the private world where speeches, papers, foreign material, and family life all blended together. Around this time, Kennedy also strengthened his public identity as a writer. His book, Profiles in Courage, won the Pulitzer Prize and added to the sense that he was more than just a handsome politician from a rich family. By 1960, he was ready for the biggest step of all. He ran for president at just 43 years old. That youth was one of the most striking things about him. Kennedy represented energy, freshness, and movement at a moment when many Americans were ready for something new. He did not sound old, look old, or carry himself like the political generation before him. He looked like the future. His Boston accent, quick wit, and willingness to meet ordinary voters where they were helped make him feel more accessible than many polished politicians ever managed to be. When he won and entered the White House in 1961, the country became fascinated with the Kennedys. It was not just politics anymore. It was style, family, image, youth, and glamour all at once. Jackie's fashion choices became front-page material. Their young children, Caroline and John Jr., made the White House feel warmer and more human. Kennedy himself brought humor into press conferences and often handled journalists with a mix of intelligence and playfulness that audiences loved. He made the presidency feel lively. But behind that liveliness was a man carrying far more pain than most people realized. Kennedy's health problems did not disappear once he became president. He continued to deal with chronic pain and serious medical issues, often while appearing cool and effortless in public. That contrast is one of the most remarkable things about him. He could look relaxed while suffering intensely. His private life, of course, was far more complicated than the public picture suggested. Kennedy was known for numerous affairs, and even during his lifetime the rumors were hard to miss. His marriage to Jackie carried strains that the public mostly did not see, and yet she remained deeply loyal to him. She understood the stakes, the pressures, and the cost of public scandal. Whatever pain his infidelity caused, she stayed. By the early 1960s, John F. Kennedy had become something larger than a normal politician. He was now the center of a national mood, youthful, confident, stylish, optimistic. But the presidency does not let charm carry the whole burden for long. And soon, Kennedy would face the kind of crisis where the smile, the wit, and the glamour meant nothing unless they were backed by real judgment. John F. Kennedy's presidency lasted less than 3 years, but those years were packed with moments that could have broken a less steady leader. One of the biggest came almost immediately. Early in his presidency, Kennedy inherited a CIA-backed plan to invade Cuba and remove Fidel Castro. The operation, which became known as the Bay of Pigs, was a disaster. It failed badly, embarrassed the United States, and it made Kennedy look inexperienced on the world stage. That failure mattered. It taught him, painfully and quickly, that military and intelligence plans could look neat on paper and fall apart in reality. He was still young, still new to office, and already learning that the presidency was not just about speeches or image. It was about carrying the consequences when things went wrong. And then came the far more dangerous test. In 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis pushed the world closer to nuclear war than it had ever been. When it was discovered that the Soviet Union was placing nuclear missiles in Cuba, the stakes became terrifyingly clear. A rash decision could have led to catastrophe. Kennedy had to balance military pressure, international optics, and the raw human fear of what a nuclear exchange would mean. This was one of the moments that defined him. Behind the scenes, the pressure was enormous. He was exhausted, tense, and fully aware that millions of lives could hinge on his judgment. According to those close to him, including Jackie, these were days of very little sleep and almost unbearable strain. But outwardly, he remained controlled. In the end, he chose a path of pressure and negotiation rather than panic. The crisis was resolved without nuclear war. That decision alone shaped how history would remember him. Kennedy could be playful in public, but he took the burden of leadership seriously. He had already seen war up close during his Navy service, and he understood that military conflict was not an abstraction. That experience shaped the way he thought. It is one reason many historians still wonder how differently later events might have unfolded if he had lived. On Vietnam, for example, there remains ongoing debate over whether he would have fully escalated American involvement the way Lyndon B. Johnson later did. No one can answer that with certainty, but it is clear Kennedy was cautious about being pulled into another massive war. At home, he also became part of a different kind of national momentum. Kennedy helped give energy to the space race and to the broader idea that America should aim high, think boldly, and push into the future. He had a gift for making big national projects feel personal. Whether he was talking about science, public service, or sacrifice, he knew how to make people feel that they were part of something larger. And then, just as the image of the Kennedy presidency seemed strongest, everything stopped. On the 22nd of November 1963, Kennedy was riding in a motorcade through Dallas, Texas, with Jackie by his side. Shots were fired, he was hit, gravely wounded, and soon pronounced dead. The shock was immediate and enormous. For millions of Americans, that moment froze in memory. It was one of those events people never forget hearing about. His assassination instantly changed him from a president into a figure of myth. The official investigation concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, but public doubt never disappeared. Oswald himself was killed before he could stand trial, and that only deepened suspicion. Over time, the assassination became surrounded by theories involving the CIA, organized crime, anti-Castro interests, Soviet ties, and more. The mystery grew so large that for many people it began to overshadow Kennedy's actual life. But the life matters more than the mystery. Kennedy was not just the victim of one of history's most famous assassinations. He was a sickly child who learned to hide pain. He was the second son who grew up in the shadow of a family favorite. He was a war hero, a writer, a politician shaped by both ambition and expectation, and a president who carried youth and pressure at the same time. He was witty, charismatic, flawed, unfaithful, courageous, and deeply human. That is what keeps him compelling. John F. Kennedy left behind a public image that still feels strangely alive, hopeful, energetic, and unfinished. Maybe that is part of why people still return to his story. His life ended before age could dull him, before long years in office could reshape him, before history could fully settle what he might have become. And so he remains suspended in memory not just as a president who died, but as a man who seemed to live every day with the uneasy knowledge that time might be shorter than it looked. All right. If you made it through this session today, that already says something about your discipline. This repetition and consistency combination might look boring on paper, but it is one of the most powerful ways to build fluent, natural English. Keep showing up like this, and your brain will slowly adapt. Trust the process. If this helped even a little, consider liking the video or subscribing. It lets me know these sessions are actually making a difference. We'll catch up again soon. Take care till then.